When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
If Germany really wants to properly tackle the far right, it needs a new social contract. It needs a positive civic national identity that politicians and others can use as a counter to the siren call of ethno-nationalism.
I'm Jane Kinninmont, and this is Disorder, a podcast where we try to make sense of our mad, and increasingly mad world. And now we're talking about Germany, perhaps not such a mad place, the biggest economy in Europe, a leading country in NATO, and now, in the European security debate, a country that is seen by many as a bastion of European security against an expansionist Russia, at a time when many Europeans liken Russia's behaviour to, well, Germany back in the 1930s. And to dive more into where Germany's at with its new government, I'm very glad to be joined today by Will Wilkes, who is a Bloomberg news correspondent in Germany, and he's a co-author of a new book, Broken Republik, the inside story of Germany's descent into chaos. And importantly, Will is based in Frankfurt, Germany, but Will, you're talking to me from Berlin right now. Tell me what you can see out of your window.
Yeah, I'm in Berlin right now, Jane, and right in the centre of Berlin, in the Bloomberg office. So we're next to the French and American embassies, and I think you can just about see the Brandenburg Gate out there.
That is awesome. You're really in the beating heart of Berlin. I've just come back from meetings in Westminster, but I'm at my home. And when I look out the window, I just see a disappointingly grey sky. So I will not show you that, but it's very nice to see where you are. So, Will, I guess we can tell already from the title of your book, Broken Republik, that this is a book that doesn't pull its punches and that you see Germany as a country that is heading rapidly in the wrong direction. I think that's super interesting. I do hear people at the moment arguing the opposite and arguing that Germany is coming out of a kind of confusing transition with a new sense of purpose. But is that just wishful thinking because there's such an absence of European leadership just now?
I think Jane, it is a degree of wishful thinking, certainly. I mean, Germany is in a fragile and uncertain place at the moment, politically, economically, and also socially. For years, especially during the period of Angela Merkel's chancellorship, Germany was considered kind of the stable anchor of Europe. And it's now kind of dealing with the legitimacy crisis, which we deal with in our book, Broken Republik. I mean, just look at the politics. The most recent election saw the main two centrist parties receive their lowest combined share of the vote since 1949. That alone shows kind of how deeply public trust in institutions has eroded. And now the Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, is leading a coalition government with just like a bare 12-seat majority. And we already saw from a couple of weeks ago his first vote to become Chancellor. He failed on that first vote, which shows how difficult it's going to be to hold discipline even within his own coalition. Now, there are signs of hope, and I think what people are talking to when they're saying perhaps Germany has turned a corner is these early months of Merz's government since the election have been marked by some quite impressive ambition. They've made major reforms to the German debt brake, which was kind of crimping investment. They've said they're prepared to do unlimited spending on defence, which is a massive change from Germany's kind of post-World Cold War posture. But perhaps the reality is a bit more volatile than that.
That's really useful context, and it brings me to an anecdotal question and then a serious question. But the anecdotal one is, as a Brit living in Germany, you're meeting important people, you're meeting all sorts of people. You've got this new book, and you'll be saying to people, well, I've written a book about your country, and they'll say, oh, what's it called? And you say, well, it's called Broken Republik. What are the reactions that you get? And really there, I mean, like, do people agree with you? Or do you get a defensive reaction, like, here you are from the UK, come to tell us that we're rubbish?
I would say, first thing is we have Broken Republik has a German twin edition, which is called Totally Kaputt with a question mark.
Nice.
One of the core points of the book is, I mean, people talk about problems with German infrastructure and also with the economy. But one of our core points that Germans really agree with is that the country has like a broken and fragmented civic national identity, and that means it doesn't have anything to counter the kind of ethno-nationalism that's been pushed by kind of a resurgent far right in Germany. And a lot of Germans look at that and say, people really do agree with that core point of the book. And we've had a lot of support. Obviously, not everything's positive because the tone of the book is quite forthright. We're not kind of messing around. And also, our book's perhaps a bit more optimistic than the title sounds, because it's kind of saying, German fragmenting society, kind of weakening economy, you can't just let that be the state of affairs kind of going forward. And a lot of Germans have appreciated that kind of fundamentally optimistic point that Germans, need to look up a bit more and, not slide into kind of a kind of fatalism about where the country's going.
That's a really interesting point about the civic nationalism, and we'll definitely come back to that. But my kind of serious question about your time in Germany was about the role of the financial crisis. How much do you think that experience has shaped what is playing out today, with the kind of anger that there was around the world at the way the financial crisis was dealt with?
There's a really interesting question in regards to Germany. It was a bit more kind of slow burn, I think, that response. I mean, Germany got quite lucky in the financial crisis, or it seemed to on the surface, in that obviously financial services weren't quite as big as part of the economy as they were in other countries. And Germany's export sector benefited massively from the huge Chinese stimulus that Beijing did to kind of revive the economy after the financial crash. So actually in that period, the kind of industrial Germany did quite well, but probably that masked over underneath. There were problems that you were seeing in other countries that the kind of financial crisis revealed, like in the United Kingdom, which was able for a long time to kind of hide some of its structural problems behind, massive income the Treasury was getting from taxes on financial services and things like that. I mean, those things were going on in Germany, but probably now it's only since coronavirus that we're kind of seeing the kind of post-financial crisis, post-coronavirus crisis kind of shake out in the German economy. And arguably the Ukraine war and the increase in gas prices was the equivalent of the financial crash for Germany. That's when its industrial economy, all the structural issues that have been building up were just laid bare in a very rapid way. And that's causing kind of this angst.
That's really interesting. We've just done another recent episode, basically, where we were talking to Tom Keating from RUSI, who we partner with for this podcast, the Royal United Services Institute here in London. And we had a live podcast, and one of the questions that came up was about A, has globalization peaked? And B, when did it peak? So just thinking about it, I'm wondering if that peak was in 2008, but we didn't know at the time because things have taken so long to shake out.
Yeah, indeed, that could well be the case. I know in Germany, the show was kept on the road for a bit longer, but I think now it's becoming clear that this export model that Germany had built, that's kind of been in decline since the first Trump presidency and around the time of Brexit. And that's really unraveling now as well with the tariffs and the uncertainty on global business. So this kind of, the German experience of globalization was probably positive for a bit longer, went well into the end of the last decade. But now it's definitely unraveling at a faster and faster pace. What's interesting is, like you said, people point to 2008, but I think very much the German experience, a lot of that unraveling is happening now.
Yeah, so interesting because at that time it was seen as relatively stable, successful, and even 10 years ago when Germany was taking in so many refugees, that appeared to be a confident, strong country that felt we can bring people in, we've got jobs for them, and our society can happily absorb them because, we've got a lot to offer and we're not afraid. And it seems like that policy has really come back to bite the government in recent years, and that this is one of the things that Merz is really U-turning on.
Yeah, indeed. I think even probably back there in 2015, there were a lot of people warning that Germans mainly saying our society is probably not quite as cohesive and coherent as you think, and we should be more cautious about this. And I think one thing that happened during the refugee crisis was, I think it gets portrayed from the outside as Germany moving confidently to let people in, and we're a strong country and we can do this. Angela Merkel famously said, "Wir schaffen das," which kind of basically telling Germans we can do this. But I think what really happened is they were a bit at that point, their immigration system had kind of semi-collapsed with the pressure of refugees moving up through Europe. They were very concerned about what was going on in the Balkans, and Merkel kind of basically faced a decision. We either have to open the borders, which is what they did, and the alternative was to police the borders. You would have had to use violence to keep people away. And faced with that impossible choice, she chose to open the borders. And to give credit to the arrivals and also German civil society, people have moved heaven and earth to integrate refugees, and there's countless kind of success stories. But I think what it did is it unsettled a lot of the population who were already concerned about their incomes had been kind of shrinking. German low-wage sector had grown since kind of reforms in the early 2000s, and a lot of the population was very unsettled by this influx of people. And because there isn't a strong civic national identity, that meant that the fallback then becomes this kind of quite tribal ethno-nationalism. And you saw after 2015, Germany was a bit of a powder keg, and the support for the AfD has exploded as a result of that. And as these economic problems have worsened since coronavirus, now you have these kind of all these unresolved tensions of, you have a weakening economy, people feeling like the system doesn't work for them, people are falling back to this kind of ethnic tribalism, and you're seeing the AfD has gone from nowhere to now, if you look at opinion polls, I mean, they're leading in some opinion polls. So it's gone from nowhere to the largest party, arguably, in Germany.
So this is really interesting, and let's talk more about that. I think you're making a really interesting argument about the lack of civic nationalism, and one that I don't think other people are clearly making. Can you tell us more about that? Like, why is that the case? Obviously, a unified Germany is actually quite a young country, but then there's also the fear of the past, the fear of nationalism. Tell us more about this thesis in your book.
Well, we look at some of the ways in which Germany was formed before the 20th century. I mean, a lot of the focus is on the post-war period. So Federal Republic was founded in 1949, and then Germany split into two. And for obvious reasons, forming in a cohesive civic national identity was not a priority when you had to rebuild a country. And it was also very difficult because of the Nazi past, and there was very little to be proud of. People shrank back from nationalism, and some German cultural things were arguably repressed. So what the country did instead was form its civic national identity has been based on two things. One, the idea of prosperity for all and Wohlstand für alle, which was huge in the economic miracle and rebuilding phase. The idea that being German, what brought us together was this economic prowess, and the fact that economic prowess where the wealth of society is fairly evenly spread. And that pillar of civic national identity is crumbling recently because you're having the share of poor Germans is growing. It's now at a fifth. The top 1% of Germany is growing richer. And the second pillar of national identity really became, look, we're not the Nazis. And it's become quite a kind of performative, we argue, in cases like memory theatre, where Germans will just kind of try and draw a line between the Nazi period and what the Federal Republic stands for. And that's obviously itself is kind of contentious and tricky because there were continuations. But I think more importantly, no one ever argued for like a cohesive, positive national identity that was built around anything other than economic prowess and we're not the Nazis. So Germany has kind of underdeveloped sense of multiculturalism. It kind of has an underdeveloped sense of kind of what brings the East and West together. That's still massively divisive. That's kind of like the mother of all German identity divisions. But this is kind of the general issue, that there's not a cohesive, civic, forward-looking, modern national identity that brings Germans all together. And it is now a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. There's no attempt or nothing to bring all those things together. And that's a major weakness at this point.
And do you see anyone in the left or the centre picking up on these ideas? I mean, I think here in the UK, Keir Starmer never seems to be like more than a foot away from a Union Jack. And there's this strong desire to show a kind of centre-left patriotism. But is that still difficult and taboo in Germany?
It can be to an extent that people don't embrace it. And you did start to see some Germany flags on SPD posters during the election. But I think actually the problem goes even deeper about this. It's just how kind of Germans feel about themselves, what their country means, and that they're actually, at a more deeper level, Germans are not open or a bit unsure how to redefine their country to include all people that now live there. And this is kind of a deeper problem than just signalling from the kind of main parties, which is again leaving the country kind of vulnerable as more and more people feel economic frustration. It's leaving parts of society that you wouldn't expect would vote for the AfD or be sympathetic to them are now going to them because there's nothing really to counterbalance that. And that's kind of a major problem. There have been a few like very nasty kind of far-right shootings and terrorist acts in recent years. There was one during the Merkel period, which is called the NSU affair, which was basically far-right groups were targeting small businesses run by German citizens from different ethnic backgrounds. And you also had the Hanau shootings in 2020, where 9 Germans watching a Champions League game, they were also from a kind of non-ethnic German background. But in both cases, the victim's family have kind of complained we were never taken seriously. And the German establishment kind of used to refer to the NSU shootings as kind of kebab shop shootings, and also the victims of the Hanau attack have said we're not taken seriously either. Germans in general kind of do have this tendency to just believe that people like that aren't part of their group, and Germany needs to build this togetherness.
Super interesting. So we've talked about the drivers of domestic disorder in a way, and the factors that affect Germany's resilience to international trends. Let's talk about Germany and its international role in Europe, because European security is undergoing this huge, tumultuous paradigm shift. And I think many people are looking to Germany, along with France, the UK, maybe Poland, to lead, and to chart a way where Europe can be secure, even if the US decides that it's not really in this game anymore and it's got other priorities. So how capable do you think that the new German government is of playing this kind of role in European defence and security? And how sustainable is that if there is the big challenge from the far right?
Well, I think the first thing is to say the way it started it on defence and on European security and broader geopolitics has been very energetic and impressive so far. Germany's, both the SPD and the CDU have kind of showed this commitment to higher defence spending, and they pushed through this reform. But I think you can't really separate it from the domestic situation. And as kind of you alluded to, I think there are big questions whether this actual defence spending push and the things needed to make the Bundeswehr strong again and really anchor European security, whether they are indeed sustainable. Because one really important thing I think about this is, the German government and Chancellor are coming out throwing these big numbers out there saying, we're going to go up to 5% of spending on defence, which would make Germany the second biggest defence spender in NATO, easily behind the United States. But I think the big issue here is it hasn't been properly debated within society. And that, I think, raises question marks over how durable this kind of German defence expansion and fixing the Bundeswehr can be. I mean, now it looks kind of relatively simple, but as you get into questions on how you recruit people to the German military, and Germany's still going to have to cut its welfare state to create the kind of the budgetary space for spending on defence. It's true they've reformed the debt brake, but they're not just going to go hell for leather. They're going to have to do fiscal consolidation elsewhere to help pay for it. And when it gets to these hard decisions, like you're cutting back welfare to spend more on defence, that's where I think the fact that this was not debated in society and this is societal question has not been addressed, that you could run into difficulty. And we saw when Friedrich Merz had his vote to be Chancellor just quite how razor thin the government's majority is, and whether he's going to have the political capital or whether his government's going to have the political capital to drive through this push on defence and a new strategic positioning, I'm not so sure. I think that you can't separate what Germany's trying to do internationally from the domestic weakness that Merz has at the moment.
This is so interesting, and I really wonder if, Merz is making a rod for his own back with this 5% number, because I think most governments across Europe are facing this dilemma. How do you ramp up defence spending when budgets are tight elsewhere? And you need to think about your social contract, or how else are you going to have a resilient society, or if it came to it, people signing up to the army. But I think from outside Germany, many have looked at Germany and basically thought, well, it's all right for them. They've got a decent economy, not so much debt. I think the 5% is the new magic number because supposedly Trump officials are saying ahead of this NATO summit in June, the president wants 5% commitments. But hey, he would take, 3.5%, 4%. So it's a kind of political bargaining. Maybe it's an attempt to get Trump's attention.
Yeah, indeed. I think that might well be. And Friedrich Merz is a transatlanticist and appears to be quite keen to curry favour with Donald Trump. But yeah, exactly like you said, Germany has, obviously has a better budget situation than the likes of the UK, Italy or Greece or France. But Germany's fiscal outlook isn't super great because you have worse demographics than in France and the United Kingdom. So Germany has some big kind of fiscal questions to answer over the coming years. So yeah, expanding defence is going to mean cutting things elsewhere. And you can already see from the election result that people are disappointed with the mainstream parties. And I think, like you said, Merz is perhaps creating a rod for himself for later on, because I can't see how he's going to be able to cut back other areas, which will, if the SPD start falling precipitously in the polls, which could well happen if they're part of a government that's cutting back welfare, then the temptation for SPD to vote against German defence budgets is going to increase. And I think one thing that Merz critically has failed to do so far, and maybe this is coming, but he's failed to make a speech where he really brings Germans together to say, like, look, we have these outside threats. Obviously domestically we've got challenges, but we need to build this new Germany secure and kind of fit for the future. Instead, he kind of falls back on quite divisive rhetoric. We're in kind of it's not a very good honeymoon because he's obviously already lost his first vote to be Chancellor, but we're perhaps in a honeymoon period where these German divisions and the division with the coalition don't seem so apparent. Let's see how it is in 12, 18 months when spending more on defence, but having to cut back on welfare, and where they are in the polls and how Germans feel about it. And I think his big error was not having a societal debate and not forcing that in the election, saying like, look, we need to do this and this and this to make Germany secure. They kind of papered over it and then surprised everyone afterwards, which is manner for the AfD as well, because they can say, look, the changes to defence spending, no one ever debated this ahead of an election. But this is going to be a major test.
Yeah, and it really makes me wonder if aging societies and their impact on the social contract are one of the sources of disorder in Europe, because economically that points to, you need the immigration, you need people of working age that are going to fund those pensions. But then right now, society doesn't seem as keen on that. This is a common challenge across Europe, but how well do you think Germany is placed to tackle that challenge of the aging population?
It's going to be quite difficult for Germany, given how now, obviously, they need immigration. I mean, the German demographic thing is really quite severe. You're kind of seeing, I think for the remainder of the decade, around 400,000 people of working age are going to drop out the workforce each year. There's already major labour shortages in kind of blue-collar jobs, and you're going to have immigration to fill that gap. But at the same time, Germany has this very hyped up debate around immigration and concerns about more migrants coming in. People are kind of, Merz himself has called Ukrainian refugees welfare tourists.
Wow.
You have this extremely divisive debate around immigration. At the same time, you're going to have need for more migrants from the economy, and I think that will continue to draw people in. It feels like in a lot of countries in Europe, this is especially true of Germany, there's lots of kind of parallel debates that are going on that don't look at the problem in the broader sphere. This is something you need to iron out and develop a civic national identity that's open to outsiders, but still remains recognisably German, that will give you a basis to kind of heal these divisions and look forward and tackle the challenges that you have ahead of you. And one of them is kind of somehow finding a balance between migration and this labour shortage that's coming up. Germany's sending these kind of twin signals of, we sort of need immigration, but foreigners aren't welcome. And again, it's another country that has not really having a mature and real debate about these kind of trade-offs that it faces.
Yeah, well, this one is definitely a global issue, but I'm really interested in that quote about the welfare tourists, and it seems so at odds with the foreign policy position of standing up for Ukraine, and Ukraine is one of us, and we are going to defend it because it's part of our security. Like, how do those things relate to one another?
Friedrich Merz, he's kind of a strange communicator at times. Like now, since he's become chancellor, he's making these overtures to Ukraine. But in the past, he's used quite divisive language to refer to refugees from that country. And I think this is another potential weakness with his leadership that's going to become clearer to everyone sooner, is he really leans into some of these ethnic divisions and he has very divisive rhetoric. That was one thing he said about Ukrainians. He also referred to like young men from the Turkish immigrant community as little pashas. And he's also said that migrants are coming to Germany to get their teeth done while Germans have to wait in line, which was so kind of factually incorrect. He got a rare rebuke from the German Dentist Association. Again, but
You don't want to upset those guys.
No. But I mean, usually they would be very careful not to get involved in.
I understand.
But it's just like this isn't true. This isn't how it works, and there's absolutely no signs or indicators that Germans are not, at the front of the queue when it comes to dental services. But yeah, I mean, this is the kind of problem maybe with this fractious and fragmented German civic identity, and the fact that it always kind of tends back to this ethno-nationalist division, and you can see that Friedrich Merz tried to profit from that. He thinks that's something that can be mined for political support, which again is another, given all Germany's various problems, this divisiveness, it seems like another potential source of German disorder that could spill out into international disorder, when people realise if Merz can't be more kind of unifying and hold Germans together, then there's more risk of domestic kind of discord in Germany, and that spilling over to Germany not being able to meet these commitments on the international stage that it's now saying it would like to.
Yeah, well, I was also very interested to hear Merz suggesting that he might welcome a visit from Benjamin Netanyahu. And obviously, Germany has very strong ties with Israel and has a historical debt, you might say. Obviously, that's going to be influenced by their very particular history. But at the same time, Germany was always an upholder of international law. And so to welcome someone that has an ICC warrant for him seems more like a Viktor Orban move. And I just wonder about that. I mean, it has seemed like with the sort of threats to deport pro-Palestinian protesters and quite severe crackdowns on a lot of the Gaza ceasefire protests, there is something going on that is not just about the past and about Israel, but about societal divisions and attitudes to migrants from Muslim countries.
Yeah, indeed. I think the Israel-Hamas war and the events since October the 7th and Israel's kind of very heavy-handed response and invasion of Gaza have caused great divisions within German society and has kind of shown a very confused reaction. Like you said, Germany is a country that was formed, the Constitution of the Federal Republic formed in 1949 as a reaction to Nazism, guaranteed universal human rights and kind of a commitment to international organizations. But obviously by inviting Netanyahu, and kind of German politicians are very careful to make sure that they're seen to be siding with Israel, and they're very careful not to criticize some of the excesses of the IDF in their invasion of the Gaza Strip. I think what the German responses to the conflict around Gaza show the lesson that Germany is trying to draw from its history is we're not the Nazis, so we must be protective of the Jewish state in the Middle East. And that raises some quite deeper questions about, especially when you see some of the draconian responses to pro-Palestinian protests or use of phrases within Germany itself. That makes you question what lessons has Germany really learn from its history. You know, human rights are either universal and people are allowed to express sympathy and solidarity with Palestinians as well as Israelis, or these rights aren't universal. You can't just make it just for one country, that being Israel, because that's the lesson you've learned. It's like, oh, we have to be extremely careful not to be perceived as anti-Semitic. I mean, it makes you question what were the lessons drawn from their own history.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a small detail, but last year I was in a cafe in Munich and they were advertising a talk about anti-Semitism, and it said, we will discuss anti-Semitism from the left, anti-Semitism from the right, and the worst anti-Semitism from Muslims. And I thought, we don't need to have a competition for which is the worst anti-Semitism. Clearly, it is bad on all sides, but there's something quite interesting about saying Muslims are worse than fascists. It's kind of convenient if you're uncomfortable with your own past.
Yeah, indeed. And I think some people across the German political spectrum do certainly use this issue of anti-Semitism to try and kind of marginalise German Muslim voices as well. I mean, I know many German Muslims, I don't very often hear expressions of or I've never really heard expressions of anti-Semitism for them. But I think it is another thing that's made to exclude kind of an othering of Muslims, like we are Germans and Germans are sorry for the acts of the Nazis and Muslims aren't, and it's kind of othering of the German Muslim community, which again you can see why this debate kind of points to Germany's fragmented civic identity. Again, a country that was more comfortable with its national identity would let this debate between Israel and Palestine happen and not view it through the prisms of its own attempted atonement for what it did in the Holocaust.
Well, before we move into some solutions and some ordering, I have one other question for you, if it's an area that you've looked at, which is feminist foreign policy. We saw Germany with a young, outspoken female foreign minister at the vanguard of what they call feminist foreign policy. Will that just disappear with the new government? Is feminist foreign policy out?
I think whether it's out completely from all the German agencies and people in German ministries and the civil service, there will be very many people who still believe in that. So I don't think it'll be that Germany completely abandons that. But I think from the top, the energy will probably go from that. Friedrich Merz has chosen an older CDU man as his foreign minister, Wadepool. There's no sign that he has the same interests as Annalena Baerbock, the previous foreign minister, on that thing. she had a lot of energy about this topic and defended it against Merz in the Bundestag when he Friedrich Merz kind of basically making out that feminist foreign policy was woke nonsense. And she came back kind of making the point about rape victims, about the need for countries to rebuild and after war periods, and that if you go to the Balkans, you need to think about specifically about women in many cases and their experiences during war if you want to rebuild the country. And that's obviously going to be an issue in post-war Ukraine, because you also have domestic violence from returning soldiers. So I think intellectually a lot of Germans in the foreign ministry and in German aid organizations realize that this is an important thing. But I think a lot of this energy on feminist things will go away because Merz is a more traditional conservative.
After the break, Will and I are going to order the disorder.
Lights, camera, innovation. Walt Disney Studios chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to transform the movie-making process. Together, we kept a remote production hub in Hawaii in sync with a team in California to bring Lilo and Stitch to theaters this summer. This is picture-perfect collaboration. This is Walt Disney Studios with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes.
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree?
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet?
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
So, Will, imagine you get into a lift somewhere near the Brandenburg Gate and the other person in the lift is Chancellor Merz. What do you say to him?
First, might offer him some sympathy, the fact that he's taken charge of Germany at this very difficult moment. So you'd be like, you've wanted to be Chancellor for a long time, and for a long period of when you wanted to be Chancellor of Germany, the German economy was going great guns, and now your chance has come at this very difficult period for Germany. I think the first bit of advice you might give him would be to, first, I think he really does need to try and make a speech or to make a big kind of Kennedy-esque kind of appeal to Germans that goes over socioeconomic divides and these growing generation gaps, and kind of just try and use your rhetoric more to bring people together. But actually, Germans need to be given more avenues where they can express their civic identity. And really, that's the core thing that's causing disorder in Germany. So for an ordering of Germany, you need kind of ground-up efforts to improve German togetherness. And for one example that we give as a solution in that book, it would be to make June the 17th a national holiday. June the 17th marks the East German uprising by the people against the East German government in 1953. And it was a process that was kind of put down violently. But the reason we suggest making that a national holiday, apart from it would be a national holiday in summer, would be because I think the mother of all German divisions is the division between East and West, and the fact that reunification, which was seen outside as having run smoothly, actually really didn't. There was massive unemployment in East Germany. East German societies never really recovered from reunification. And the economic collapse that came after it, the population is lower because people didn't have children or people moved away because things were so tough in East Germany. And there's just this simmering resentment. And that is also the kind of stronghold of AfD support. Making June 17th the national holiday to bring all Germans together would kind of be partly an apology to the East for being trampled on after reunification. And it might also be the kind of act of contrition and kind of openness that starts a German debate on its civic national identity. And then maybe you open the door to apologies towards Gastarbeiter and immigrant communities where they have been kind of marginalized, and that you get into kind of a bit more softness around some of these identity themes in Germany and kind of push to the future. And another one we kind of suggest is German, and a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but Germany's could make more of the asparagus season, which again...
I like this.
It would be to have kind of a period where you have the annual Spargel harvest season, which is kind of around now, early summer, would be to have a kind of a thing that brings Germans together. It's not top-down politics. It's not driven by like mainstream established parties. It doesn't have all these political structures around it. It's something where Germans could get together and maybe like have barbecues and celebrate this period and parties, and you could use it for people to go to asparagus events in the East and the West, and it could bring people together, like create new civic traditions that kind of have one foot in the past, but you could also bring in new immigrant adaptations of asparagus recipes. And then at the end, you can just have like a big party where everyone kind of drinks too much at barbecues and
I'll see you there.
And yeah. But I think this is the kind of thing, like debates around German identity get so heavy so quickly, and it's all focused on crimes of the past. Obviously, that's one thing, but it's not working just to say we're not the Nazis and that's it. You can see that a lot of Germans don't believe that, and that's why this ethnic nationalism is so appealing to so many, because there's nothing positive for Germans to latch onto.
I wonder if you have a view on the firewall with the AfD and the treatment of that party, because it sounds to me like you're saying what's most important is to address some of the causes. But I don't know if you go into, how the mainstream German parties should deal with that challenge as the fringe becomes mainstream through the force of numbers.
Yeah, this is a very difficult question. If you get into banning them, then you really are just treating the symptoms and not the causes. And this won't make the German far right go away. And it could organise itself in different and more violent ways. And I think really it's a very fraught discussion for Germans, and a lot of Germans are calling for the AfD to be banned. But I think that's the wrong way, because, like I said, it just treats the symptom and not the cause. And the cause of the problem is this fragmented civic national identity that's no counter to ethno-nationalism. If Germany really wants to properly tackle the far right, it needs a new social contract. It needs a positive civic national identity that politicians and others can use as a counter to the siren call of ethno-nationalism. But the firewall, I think, is weakening, and these attempts to try and artificially keep it up by banning the AfD or just calling them Nazis and suppressing them that way. I'm not familiar with a country where that approach to nationalistic populism has worked. And there's the very, very real risk it leads to another completely worse level of disorder that is kind of unimaginable. Really, Germany needs to debate its civic national identity and form a new one. And that is the only way over the long term that you're going to be able to head off the AfD.
Given all this, what do you think other European leaders like Starmer and Macron should prioritise when they're working with Merz? Obviously, Ukraine is top of the agenda right now. Should they keep focusing on Ukraine? Is there a wider set of things they should be doing to cooperate now across Europe with various common challenges?
Yeah, I think one thing that would really help German society that foreign leaders could do would be to make sure that there are ways in which this new German defence spending can be anchored within European structures as much as possible, and that German population has reassurance that this massively increased German defence spending and this push on foreign policy that is anchored within a kind of Warsaw, Paris, Berlin, London grouping. I don't want to use the word axis. And that people are... Yeah, it is. But yeah, that this is not Germany going on its own, because I think what is going to come up over the coming months is this increased defence spending is going to generate a lot of German angst about where it's going, and Germany hasn't had this societal debate. So the Germany's neighbours offering support to Germany and offering support to Merz and saying kind of, look, we're all going to do this together with or without the Americans, but this is a pan-European thing that we're doing for security. This isn't, Germany is not going down another dark path on its own. I think anything that they can do to reassure the German public will make Merz's job easier. and will help calm what I think might become quite an inflamed domestic debate in Germany over the coming years over its defence posture.
Well, thank you. I think that's good advice and something very feasible if people just think about it and use a little imagination. Well, it's been great having you on the show. Listeners, you can check the show notes for more of Will's writings and information about the book. Please subscribe to our Substack as well. And you can follow us on most of the usual social media, but we're not on X these days. Will, it's been lovely having you. Thank you very much, and wish you an orderly week.
Thank you very much, Jane. It's a real pleasure to be on. And thanks to everyone for listening. Thank you.
I'm just going to say thanks to our producer, George McDonough. Thanks all of you for listening.